Today, I want to talk about unhealthy coping mechanisms, what they are, why we develop them, and why they can feel so difficult to change. Every human being copes, and every human being goes through trauma. Coping is not a flaw, it is a biological and psychological necessity. The nervous system is constantly trying to regulate distress. The question is not whether we cope, but how we cope, and whether that strategy that we use provides short term relief at the expense of long term well being. A coping mechanism is any thought pattern or behavior we use to manage emotional discomfort. That discomfort might be anxiety, shame, loneliness, overwhelm, grief, uncertainty, or unresolved trauma. When stress activates the amygdala and the body shifts into a heightened state, increases cortisol, elevated heart rate, mental agitation, the brain looks for relief. If a behavior reduces this stress response, even temporarily, the brain codes it as helpful. The distress followed by relief strengthens that neural loop. Over time, that loop becomes automatic. The key is understanding that unhealthy coping mechanisms often develop because they work, at least in the short term. Emotional eating, for example, activates dopamine and opioid pathways. It increases pleasure signaling and temporarily blunts stress. That relief is real. So if you crave cupcakes, it's real. The problem is that the emotional trigger remains unresolved, and over time, the behavior can contribute to weight gain, metabolic strain, and guilt, which then creates even more distress. The brain learns the cycle: stress, eat, relief, repeat. Binging on television or mindless scrolling, unlimited screen time are newer ways we are coping with stress and numbing ourselves. Substance abuse follows a very similar pattern. Alcohol and nicotine alter neurotransmitter signaling, often dampening anxiety or creating temporary relaxation. But tolerance develops over time. The sleep quality declines, mood stability suffers, and the baseline stress response may worsen. What started as relief becomes dependence on external regulation. You may have noticed that what a single glass of wine could do needs 2 or 3 glasses of wine now. Avoidance is another common coping mechanism. Avoiding difficult conversation, postponing medical appointments, procrastinating on meaningful tasks. These behaviors reduce anxiety in the moment, but avoidance reinforces fear circuits. The more we avoid, the more threatening the avoided situation becomes in our mind. Anxiety grows further and does not resolve. Procrastination is a coping mechanism too. Some unhealthy coping mechanisms are socially rewarded. Overworking, hyperproductivity, constant busyness can look like ambition, but sometimes they function as distraction from emotional vulnerability or unresolved stress and trauma. Productivity becomes a shield against stillness, and stillness can feel unsafe for someone whose nervous system is accustomed to high alert. Even rumination and self-criticism can function as coping mechanisms. Replaying events or criticizing oneself can create the illusion of control or problem solving. But in reality, they maintain stress activation and reinforce shame circuits in the brain. What all unhealthy coping mechanisms have in common is that they reduce distress quickly, they do not resolve the root cause, and they create secondary consequences. Over time, they strengthen neural pathways that make the behavior feel automatic. The brain prefers familiarity. Even harmful patterns can feel safe because they're predictable. This is where shame becomes counterproductive. When we criticize ourselves for coping in unhealthy ways, we activate the same stress circuits that drove the coping behavior in the first place. Shame rarely produces sustainable change. Awareness does. A more effective question is not, why do I keep doing this, but what is this behavior helping me avoid, soothe, or regulate? That shift moves us from judgment to curiosity. Curiosity engages the prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for reflection, planning, and intentional change, the executive part of our brain. Healthy coping mechanisms are not defined by perfection. They are defined by sustainability. They regulate the nervous system without creating long-term harm. They build resilience rather than erode it. Examples include movement, exercising, structured problem solving, therapy, meaningful connection, journaling, boundary setting, breath regulation, yoga, and rest. These strategies may feel like they are not soothing initially, but regular engagement helps strengthen that emotional regulation capacity. Even things like nicer sheets or a candle can help. Change does not happen by abruptly removing the coping mechanism without replacement. Nervous system needs alternatives. The process in identifying triggers, recognizing the relief cycle, and gradually introducing new behaviors and building tolerance for discomfort. Discomfort during this phase is expected. It reflects neuroplastic change, which means the brain is forming new pathways. It is important to remember that unhealthy coping mechanisms are not evidence of weakness. They are evidence that the brain is doing what it's supposed to do. The goal is not to eliminate coping. The goal is to upgrade it. Relief is human. Seeking comfort is human. Sustainable regulation is growth. And growth begins not with shame, but with understanding our patterns. Thank you.